Hello everyone, this is an open session and my name is Peter Willington. I am the production director at Auroch Digital. This is the big question, of course, when's dinner? It's the question that we've always asked ourselves, isn't it, as production team members. And when I ask when's dinner, what I really mean is, what are you eating for dinner? When are you eating dinner? And where are you eating dinner? Can you tell me with 100% certainty that you know the answer to all three of those questions? Right? Eating dinner, really important. Really important. I certainly like it. But I don't think I could tell you exactly what I'm going to eat for dinner tonight. I don't necessarily think I can tell you exactly the time that I'll be eating dinner tonight. And I don't know in which exact location I'm going to be eating. It's probably going to be within my house, but on a couch, in front of the TV, at the dinner table, in the garden. I can't tell you with 100% certainty any of those three things. Now, this is a really important question because this sustains me. Food sustains me. Dinner's important. But I can't give you the answer to any of those questions with 100% certainty. And if that's the case, how do you know with 100% certainty where your project is going to be in 2 years' time? It's an interesting question, isn't it? What about in 2 months' time? Do you think you can tell me that with 100% certainty where your project will be? Exactly what it's going to look like, exactly when it's coming in, exactly the amount of budget you'll spend on it. What about in 2 weeks' time? I don't think you can do it with 100% certainty. I really don't. And I think that's okay. And I don't think it's actually too much of a problem. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about that idea about prediction and how we predict the future. And we're going to talk about these things. We're going to talk about the context in which our approach to prediction came out of. We're going to talk about why uncertainty is something that is a bit taboo. We're going to talk about why prediction is not one thing or another. It's not a yes or a no. We're going to talk about the tools that we use to help, and I'm going to use the word scry the future, the things that we do, the techniques that we use to plan ahead and forecast ahead. And I'm also going to tell you about the lessons that we learned as we were developing these ideas and continue to develop these ideas. This is a great quote. Ambiguity is the enemy of accountability. This is from Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And at the end of this presentation, by the way, I'm going to give you a bibliography of some of the important stuff that's kind of gone to shape our thinking on forecasting. And it's an interesting quote because without a firm sense of where things are going, you can't keep things accountable. But is it the enemy of accountability? Is ambiguity truly the enemy of accountability? Or is it simply something that has to be taken into account? So what's the context? Why should you care? Why should you listen to, somebody like me coming and telling you about how we do this at Auroch? Well, so I've been with Auroch for over 8 years now, coming up on 9 years, and we developed this idea about prediction and forecasting when it came to, how we use time on projects. We did that over a variety of years as an indie studio, and after we were acquired by Sumo Group. And we apply this in various different ways to own IP titles. We do it to licensed titles. We do it with projects whereby we have an external publisher. We do it with projects whereby we have an internal publisher. We do it on our porting. We do it on our work for hire. And on the right-hand side of this, what you can see is many of the projects that we've applied this to in various different ways, including the bottom right one, which is a super secret one that, as of recording, I can't tell you about, but it's a very exciting game. Look forward to it. But all of these titles have had, to some extent, a version of this forecasting. And you can see it goes across a variety of different things, from AAA, AA, games as service, all the way to indie and all that good stuff. And it includes all the disciplines in our studio, and our studio is remote. And we've also used this to collaborate with a whole bunch of different kinds of stakeholders. And our work is, I think it's good. It's commercially successful. It makes us money. It sells well, and it's highly regarded. People like it. Our partners are happy, right? So the forecasting that we've used is not necessarily the thing that's given us all of these things, but it's certainly helped. And I want to tell you about our mindset. So production is not punitive. This is something that we say a lot. The idea that nothing about production should be about catching somebody out doing something. Yeah, it's just not something that I care about apart from anything else. Production should be about helping the team reach its goals. And also, everybody's involved in that estimating and tracking of work, right? So that's really important. We say that everybody's involved in production to some degree. We also are not agile, we are not waterfall, we don't use Scrum or Kanban or Prince2 exactly as they are intended. We blend all of these different adaptive and predictive methodologies together. If there is one piece of work that we find particularly compelling, it's the Agile Manifesto, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there, but we are not very interested in keeping to dogma, essentially. So we're not a Scrum team. We're a blend of different things. For example, we don't do sprints, but everything I talk about here applies to any methodology that you want to use. So just because you're a DSDM team, for example, you can apply that here. Overtime is not something that's heroic. It's a red flag. This is really important to us. Now, this is not us saying that we've not done overtime before. Like, we've definitely done overtime before, but it is not something to be celebrated. It is something that shows us that something is going wrong. We do not celebrate overtime because it's clearly something that isn't working in our production process. And it's a red flag for production to immediately go, and indeed the directors at our studio to immediately go, why is this happening? How do we stop it from happening again in the future? And also, we use data a lot, but it informs what we do. It doesn't dictate what we do, which is to say we're not running projects from a spreadsheet, right? Human beings make projects. Data doesn't make projects, but it does inform how we make decisions, how those humans make decisions. And the reason that we don't run a project as pure data is because data is really dangerous. As soon as you make data, as soon as you have data, you are kind of giving a sense of certainty about something. If you say, do you like our game? Somebody says, oh yeah, I really like your game. There's ambiguity there. That there's something good about the game, but there might also be some things that are not so good about the game, right? There's ambiguity. Whereas if somebody says 9 out of 10, that feels more concrete simply because it's a number, because it's quantitative. And that doesn't actually give good answers as to whether or not, like, what it is that's not good or is good about your game. And one of the other reasons that data is dangerous is because humans have to interpret the data. Data is always correct if you put the right data in. But humans are always going to interpret what that data means. So, we got 9 out of 10 on the last game. That means that everything that we did was really, really good, and we don't need to change what it is about this game in the future because it's a really good game. And that's a human interpreting that data and making a qualitative decision, right? So data is really, really dangerous because it gives us that false impression of certainty, but humans are still having to interpret that data, and humans are fallible, gloriously fallible. Data is a thing that if you put rubbish into it, if you have bad data, you will get bad data back out of it. Again, that certainty makes you think it's good. You don't know that necessarily. So you have to make sure that it's good data going in. Data is really ripe for abuse. Anything in which you have concrete, this is exactly how it is ripe for doing things in a specific way, or changing and warping what that data means to fit a narrative that you want to tell. And also, apart from anything else, your reliance on data basically just dulls the senses that truly make art, commercial art, great. It dulls the human element. It means that you can just use data to make decisions for you, rather than have to be that human that makes that difficult decision informed by that data. Person who's often misquoted about this stuff. This is the full quote from Deming in The New Economics, which is a bit of a dry book, but it's a very good quote. It's wrong to suppose that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. This is an economist, somebody who's particularly data-driven, saying that just because you can't measure something doesn't mean that you can't manage something. You can't affect something or interpret something. That's a really important line, because there are a lot of people who want to get as much data as possible, and all the data in the world will just solve your problem, and it won't. So why are we so caught up on uncertainty, and why do we think uncertainty is like a bad thing? From my opinion, I feel like a lot of this comes from how project management that we use today essentially had its beginnings in the late 19th, early 20th century. The project management that we use today is not a million miles away from the project management that we used to make bridges and buildings, and that's all really, really good. But also the more modern stuff it came about from the 50s and 60s in the more predictive methodologies, and the more adaptive methodologies, agile, that sort of thing. That's now 40, coming up on 50 years old. The Agile Manifesto is old now. And so all of these major influences are from a time that isn't really applicable to how we work now, because things have changed. But those previous methodologies were very much about, a beautifully put together Gantt chart of you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and now you have a car. And that certainty has come with us as we move into making things like commercial art, or exploring the boundaries of science, or creating new products that disrupt the market, right? And they are much, much, much more difficult to predict. But also, hey, businesses want certainty. The best thing about any environment is for it to stay stable for a business to thrive, right? That's why major world events cause businesses to go out of business, because that change to the environment is bad. And I would also say that there were a bunch of folks that guaranteed those businesses that wanted certainty that they could have certainty. And there still are a number of people that perpetuate this myth that certainty in all kinds of project management is absolutely possible in all environments. People made money from it and then walked away when those businesses went wrong, or the improvements that they made weren't necessarily the things that actually kept that business afloat. So there's money in perpetuating that myth, but also we're to blame as well, right? Like I've spoken to lots of project managers who have said, well, it's definitely going to be by here, here, and here, and the feeling of ambiguity scares them, because it's this idea that they're not fully in control of the project. And ultimately, the other part of it is we're human beings. I'm going to keep coming back to this idea that we're human beings. Human beings want certainty as well. Uncertainty is what that noise in the undergrowth was. I can't see it. That's uncertain. That's dangerous. Because it could either be a really cute little chimpanzee, or it could be a saber-toothed tiger. It could be any of those things. And so we have this uncertain, this aversion to uncertainty. Hugh Hendry is a famous investor. And again, investors fall into this trap of, oh yeah, we can definitely get you loads of money, and we can definitely do that. And actually, what Hugh Hendry says is that that's not the case. They're just trying to improve the probability that they're going to make money, which I think is you can see from sort of advanced thinking folks in different industries are coming to grips with this idea of ambiguity. Because, look, the future is really, really complex. It is not one thing or another. And I'm going to give you an example of prediction. I promise we're going to get onto how to make video games in a bit, but I'm going to give you an example from the real world, which is weather prediction. Okay, so we think that weather is, well, it's either going to rain or it's not going to rain. Okay, that's generally how we think about the weather and predicting the weather. But actually, that's not quite the case. When clever meteorologists do weather forecasting, what they're actually doing is saying that there is a percentage chance of a defined outcome. What they're saying is, based on all of the data that we have had historically, that the Met Office has gathered for X number of years, in all of those situations, when you do some clever averaging and maths and all that sort of stuff, in 90% of those situations, it has rained. Now, what they're not saying is it's going to rain. They're saying there is a 90% likelihood that it will rain. So it's very likely, but of course, there's still that 1 in 10 chance that it won't. Okay? And they're using that data to give various different percentages as to certain outcomes. And then this gets even more complicated when you or I get involved in it. The weather app on your phone pulls data from a variety of different sources, and it might pull from some, it might not pull from others. And there is a percentage reliability of the sources that they're pulling the data from. So different weather forecasting companies are not built equal. They will have better or worse abilities to predict different kinds of weather patterns. So there's actually now a percentage chance of how reliable that initial 90% forecast is. How accurate is the weather app that you have on your phone? That's another level of prediction that you have to add into the equation. And ultimately, whether or not it rains or it doesn't, there's different kinds, right? As a true red-blooded Brit myself, we've got 1,000 names for rain, right? We've got drizzle, we've got torrential, it's cats and dogs, it's lots of different kinds of rain. And more than that, the outcome of that rain has different ramifications. So today I'm working from home, and if I look at my phone and it says, oh, there's a 90% chance of rain, I don't care because I'm not going outside today. But if I was going outside, I would care more. If I was working for the British Museum, and I was transporting some form of antique or something along those lines, and I had to move it from one building to another, in which I moved it through the outside. If it's going to rain, that's a huge problem because I don't want to get that antique wet, right? That would be huge. It's really important as to whether or not it's going to rain. So the likelihood that you want to take a chance on it, well, there's a 10% chance of it being sunny, is much, much harder when you're doing something where that outcome is really important. So why are we doing any of this stuff, right? Like, why are we even talking about forecasting today? And Eiji Toyoda, who was part of the Toyota family that came up with the Toyota production system, said this quote, and it really hit me very hard when I first read this quote. And it's worth taking a moment to explore it. Employees are offering a very important part of their life to us. If we don't use their time effectively, we are wasting their lives. Production is a moral imperative. People give us 8 hours of their day, 5 days a week, out of the 7 days that they get out of that week in total, right? You work for 5 days, you are off for 2 days. That's how we've set the world up. And if we waste people's time, if we make people's lives harder while they're at work, we are genuinely damaging their lives. It is a moral imperative that we get this stuff right, and forecasting is a big part of that. So how do you do it? Well, look, there's really easy ways of doing some of this stuff. And all of these things, like I say, these can be applied to a whole bunch of different methodologies that you have. They do not have to go through, you don't have to be doing Scrum, you don't have to be doing Auroch's weird internal version, you don't have to be doing Kanban, whatever. You can do versions of these. So burn downs. Hopefully everybody knows what a burn down is, but if you don't know, see that thin red line? That thin red line is the amount of budget that you have to make the thing. So that's the number of developer weeks that you've got. And then you can see that the graph underneath shows different kinds of data about the actual work that needs to be done. The TLDR on this is so long as the red line, the thin red line, is above the graph, you have enough time to complete all of that work in the project. And what you can see here is that we split our work into musts and shoulds and coulds. We use the Moscow method, which talks about different qualities of work. Must, you have to get it done. There's no ifs and or buts. Shoulds, this is something that would really, really delight the player. Coulds, the player would really love this, but they're not expecting this. And you can also see that we also have verifies. So you'll see the different colored lines above the pink area of the graph. Those are verifies. Verifies are somebody has claimed that this work is done, and obviously, we believe them, but we want somebody to go and check that work actually is to the spec. And so what you can see here is, and this is real data. Everything I'm about to show you from all of these, it comes from our projects. I have anonymized them to protect the innocent. But ultimately, this is real data, and this is how an actual project went. And you can see it went up, and then it came all the way back down. So as we discovered what the work was, it went up, and as we cleared the work, it went down. And obviously, sometimes that graph goes back up again because you add more work into the project, you do a load of testing, you go, oh, whoops, we've messed this up. Cool, there's some bugs now, and bugs are just work. So you just add it into that. And what you can see here is we accurately predicted how much budget we would need. And we also managed that project well, so that when things started to flatline, we went, okay, what can we do to bring that down? Or why is that graph going up at the moment? What can we do to bring it down? And if you're able to keep that graph underneath that red line, then you're able to deliver everything that you need to do for the musts. So, hey, nobody comes along and gets angry at you that you haven't delivered the thing that you're going to deliver. And, hey, looks like we also delivered all the shoulds. And I think we delivered all the coulds as well. So we delivered absolutely every single thing that we wanted to do. Not just the bare minimum, we delivered everything that we wanted to do from a code perspective. And again, we can break this up into, this is for the full project, right? But we can break this up into code, into design. We can break this up into art. We could, if we wanted to, we could break this up into sub-art disciplines if we really wanted to get into that level of detail. And we can also break it up into different milestones. The milestone here is the end of the project, but we could break it up into milestone 3, milestone 4, milestone 5. How on track are you for those milestones? And you can know those things way in advance. You can know how far on track you are for milestone 5 when you're still working on milestone 1. And of course, we could also do this with features. It doesn't just have to be all of the work in the project. It could also be, hey, how are the guns coming along on bolt gun? We could figure that out. For example, we could use these graphs to find out how are all of the rockets doing on Mars Horizon. Right? We can see, oh, once we get to the end of that graph, well, they're all done, or they're all done to a must standard. Ah, brilliant. Let's get them to that should standard so that people really like those rockets. But you can also then delve into task type. Now we use Asana to track our work, but you could do this in Jira, you could do this in ADO, you could probably try and do this in Trello. You could do this with Post-it notes, right? And so we have different, essentially tags that let us talk about different kinds of work. Good example of this is bugs, right? Bugs are just work. like they're essentially just tasks, but they're just tasks you weren't expecting. And they're broken up into A through D here at Auroch. So class A is a showstopper, all the way down to D is the only people who would know about this are the developers. And we can break our bug work up into those different sections. So we can say, oh, cool, well, how many A's have we got outstanding? Because if you've got lots of showstoppers, that's indicating that there might be something going wrong here, right? Now, maybe those showstoppers are really difficult to get to, and a player would normally never be able to get to it, in which case, yeah, it's a class A, but it might be a could. It might be a could task rather than a must task. But if you've got 20 class A's, something clearly is going wrong somewhere. And that piece of data, that piece of forecasting allows us to then go into the project itself and find out where are these class A's coming from? Are there any patterns where these class A's are coming from? So we can also do this for feature progress, like we talked earlier. It doesn't have to be a burn down. We could do it in a sort of pie graph like this. Maybe these bugs show project stability. Maybe if you've got 0 bugs outstanding, the project is just really, really stable. Or maybe you haven't done any testing yet, right? It's one of those two things. And again, that prediction allows us to go, well, how much QA time have we had on this project? Oh, we've had thousands and thousands of hours, and we've got 3 bugs left. That's probably a pretty good indicator of the stability of the project. Oh, we've got 3 bugs left. How much QA time have we spent on it? Nothing. Ooh, that's really risky. There's probably some technical debt sitting around. We should probably go and get some more testing time, right? Now, this graph on the right-hand side shows the number of tasks that we have, but perhaps hours is more useful. How long are all of those class A's going to take? Because you can absolutely estimate for class A's through D's and all bugs. You can estimate work, and indeed that is what we do. We estimate all of our work at the point in which we know about it. And we get our individual disciplines to, the keys of those disciplines to do those estimates so that they're as accurate as possible. And like I said, I can click through into one of these sections and I can go and look at all of the class A's. What are they? Where are they coming from? Oh, they're all coming from the addressables in our porting project. Oh, wow, okay. How stable is the addressables? Should we have somebody from code go and look at those addressables? Good question. Good kind of forecasting. It's not telling us with 100% certainty when the project's going to come in, but it's definitely giving us some steers to be like, oh, you should go and check this out. Because if it isn't, if you don't go and look at these things, there's a chance that the project won't come out on time. Now, I would pair all of this with, like I say, things like QA dev effort. I can go and look at test plans, for example. That's another form of data I can go and look at. How many passes and fails do we have? How many tests are being run by QA? Again, we've had 1,000 hours of QA put on this project. Wonderful. We do 4 tests. Ooh, that's not good. Again, these are things that you can go and investigate. And as a producer, I think you should be. So estimate versus actual. Now, this is a cool one. How on track will we be at the current rate of inaccuracy? So the middle image you can see there is the amount, on the left-hand side is the amount of hours put into a specific task, and on the right-hand side is the dev effort that in hours that we estimate this task will take. And if it's highlighted in red, it's run over, and you can see that we're a few hours over on some of these things, but mostly we're not, okay? We can actually look at these and go, oh, brilliant, like mostly we're on track with our estimates. Mostly our estimates have been really accurate. Talked about garbage in, garbage out earlier. If your estimates are bad, then you're probably going to get a load of stuff that's running over, right? Or running massively under. You're still wrong in both situations, right? If you do an estimate of 28 hours, you run over to 35 hours, you're wrong. If you do an estimate of 28 hours and you run under to 21 hours, you're still wrong, right? One of those is better than the other, but at the end of the day, you're still inaccurate. And you can figure out what that percentage of inaccuracy is. And on the right-hand side, the right-hand side image, what we have here is, and as I say, I've blurred out the team members here, but I'm displaying here for myself, after I did a small study on this, how many tasks did this person do? Which discipline are they from? Which role level do they have? How many of the tasks fit within the data set that we're studying? i.e., the data set that we were studying is within a 30% plus or minus accuracy of dev effort against the estimated dev effort. And therefore, what is the percentage of the tasks of the total number of tasks tracked that were within that 30% plus or minus accuracy level? So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that we can actually talk about how good at working to certain estimates people are. Not whether or not the work is any good, just to be clear, but how good they are at working to a specific estimate. And you can do this by a task, you can do this by a feature, you can do this by a milestone, you can do this for the entire project if you really wanted to. And what I pair this with is I would go and talk with the team to understand if that work was to time, but it was also to quality, right? And that's the thing that I was talking about there. Not flying the room. There you go. Highly professional. That's what I was talking about there in terms of time and quality. This isn't going to tell you whether or not you're making the right thing, and it's not going to tell you about whether or not what the work is high quality, but what it will tell you is if the work is to a specific time, and I can then go and talk with the team, and I can play the game, and I can look at the work, and I can see if it is high quality, and I can pair these two things together, and if they're both high quality and to time, well, that's very exciting. Because prediction is a skill. It's a really important skill, but it's a skill like any other skill, and you can get better. You can get better at it. You can get worse at it. People naturally start as better or worse. If you go and look at Tetlock and Gardner's work on super forecasters, they identified that certain people had certain traits that made them better at, on average, of doing predictions. And we basically nicked some of that idea to go and find out, do we have any super forecasters? Do we actually have people at the studio that are particularly good at keeping to those estimates? And we also broke that data down to say, okay, well, what about, does that change based on role, for example? And we found out that yes, it did. So on the right-hand side here, you can see an image, and this was data that we gathered in 2023, that basically said that juniors and associates and mids were, in general, kind of all roughly the same at being able to stick to certain estimates, right? So about 70-odd% of accuracy with those initial estimates. And then as soon as we went to senior, we found that number absolutely skyrocketed. It went much, much higher. We thought, that's interesting. But what we thought was even more interesting is that the two worst performing areas of our teams were leads and principals. They're actually the worst at keeping to those estimates. And we thought, wow, okay, why is this? And when we went and talked to various different team members about this stuff, it actually becomes really clear. And some of you, I'm sure, will be thinking to yourself, I know why that is. It's because principals and leads are tackling the hardest, most challenging tasks within the project. The things with the most ambiguity about them, the things that you've never solved before, they're being done by leads and principals. They're not being done by juniors and associates and mids, right? So yes, their skill at estimating is probably going up over time, and their skill in general is going up over time, you would hope, but they're tackling the hardest work. So again, work is also, not all work is built the same. And that also has to factor into the way that you predict about how good people are at predicting things. So then why are seniors so good at this? Well, I think part of this is that the data set is slightly small for seniors particularly. But in general, our thinking is, well, seniors might be doing stuff that the leads and the principals are doing, but they're more likely to be doing things that mids and associates are doing. there seems to be probably a combination of those things, because we have quite a small team, so everybody kind of mucks in with lots of different stuff. And that probably means that seniors get more time to work on things that are well within their skill level, whereas principals and leads don't. We don't know for sure. I can't give you 100% certainty that that's the case, but it's something that we're kind of looking into to have a think about whether or not that is the case. Maybe we'll never know, but it's an interesting thing to go and explore. You can also measure raw dev effort delivery. How much time are you actually getting from your team members? Because it's all very well and good to budget, hey, this person's on this project full time, all the time, all week, and so therefore they're able to deliver 35 hours of work, or 40 hours of work, or however many hours of work it is that your team is scheduling your teams for. But is that actually true? Do you actually get that amount of time out of people? Because you're going to be in meetings, you're going to have people doing things like SEC. Nobody predicted that you were going to be here watching this video right now, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, wherever it was that you ended up being put onto your current project. So that's work time that you're not actually delivering work, right? So, but we can find out how much dev effort we're actually getting from all of our team members, and we do. We want to know this not because we want to check up on people. Again, production isn't punitive. The reason we want to do this is because we want to know if we're overburdening our teams with work, they won't get to be able to do all that work, and therefore we are behind, and therefore if we're behind, we will either have to cut or de-scope in some way. We will have to find more budget. We will have to do overtime as the very worst possible ending to that, right? So instead of doing any of that, to start mitigating for that amount of work, what we do instead is we say, cool, well, how many hours do we actually get out of people then? And it turns out it's roughly 28 hours for somebody who is not a key or a lead or has some kind of line management responsibility. And it also turns out that 28 hours is not for somebody who is in some way running a big section of the project. So, for example, our key designer on a project, we're not going to get 28 hours out of them because they're probably going to be in things like backlog refinements, right? They're probably going to be in meetings. They're probably going to be talking to stakeholders. So we just assume that they aren't going to do those. So what we essentially do with our non-keys and our non-leads is we say, cool, well, we expect roughly 28 hours. So do we get that? Well, it turns out, yeah, kind of, like pretty much. We made that assumption based on gut feeling. We talked to team members. How long do you think roughly your time is taken up with meetings and your computer falling over and people asking you a message and all that sort of stuff? About a day was the response that we got. And that was a couple of years ago. And then we started measuring it. Do we get 28 hours? And the answer is yeah, pretty much with non-keys, non-leads. So, for example, on the right-hand side here, here's animation. And you can see that the green line is a staff member. The yellow is another staff member, so it's the blue. Our baseline, purple, that's the 28 hours that we would expect. And what you can see between staff 1 through 3 is that, on average, generally, people are kind of roughly there. Sometimes they do quite a bit more than the 28 hours that we were expecting, and sometimes they do quite a bit less. Right? Now, that might be that they had holiday or they were sick or one of those sorts of things. But again, you can't predict for those things. So we take that into account. And what we then see is, well, what happens with the entire animation team? Okay, well, you take the average of all 3 of those staff members and you get the actual average. And you can see on the animation team, this is the amount of dev effort we would expect to be delivered. And it turns out, yeah, they're pretty much on it. So yeah, some people might have better weeks and some people might have worse weeks, but they seem to even each other out. And if this is consistent with that estimate versus actual, well, now we can actually, that we talked about earlier, well, now we can deliver throughput. So now we can actually say that task takes 56 hours and you've got team members who, on average, put through 28 hours a week. Brilliant. Yep. 2 weeks. You want that? 2 weeks. If it's inconsistent, we'd investigate it. We go and find out, okay, well, why are we getting less than 28 hours? it's probable, again, we come from a culture of trust, it's probable that it's just in a lot of meetings. Brilliant. Can we kill any of those meetings? Can production get anything out of their way? Can production do anything to make this easier? Can another team, another discipline make things easier for the animation team or the code team, or whoever it ends up being? Possibly. We can also look into, well, what do they actually spend their time doing, right? Because again, we're expecting 28 hours of work, but what kind of work are they doing? And we can split that up here. And so, for example, here's the amount of task time that this specific person has got. They got 67% of the time that they spent that week on tasks, and that's, make a barrel or, program this feature, whatever it ends up being. But this person is also a lead. And you can see that they spent 9% of their time for that week doing lead stuff. So that once again gives us the data to go, yeah, you know what, that person, we were right. When the keys and leads told us, hey, we get even less time than that 28 hours because we're doing lead stuff, key stuff. This data proves them right? We went and talked to them first and went, okay. And we looked at the data and went, yep, no, you're absolutely right. You don't get that 28 hours. Right? And that, again, in production, that means we can go, brilliant. So then we should forecast that you get 21 hours a week to be able to do that stuff, because clearly your time is being taken up with these other things. What does that do to our expected delivery as to whether or not we're on time? You might notice here that on this one, we also track overtime, 0% on this person, in this instance. I want to be very careful about overtime. I specifically wanted to put this in because I wanted to talk about it. We track overtime manually. We ask people to come to us explicitly. We ask people to go to their key producer and say, I am doing overtime, this is the number of hours that I have done. And we want that because we want that to be the initial start of the conversation. We don't want an overtime tracker or task or something along those lines where people can just track it in, because we don't expect them to do overtime. We don't want them to do overtime. We don't want, and again, if you put that piece of data in that task in or tracker in that says overtime tracker, you're implying to your team that you expect it. And actually we don't. We want people to come up with better solves than just doing more hours. And again, this has helped us identify issues around expertise and leadership. For this particular project, this person said, I'm not getting enough time to actually do this really, really difficult work that I need to do. We went, okay, brilliant. We went and got somebody to go and support them in terms of to take some of their responsibilities away, a little bit of some line management stuff to basically temporarily look after that whilst they manage to get the project back on track. Right. And that's only because we were able to have that conversation and look at the data. They were correct. Cool, we can just move on and do that. And we know that we can go and ask for budget for that because we know that this is the case. And we can also use this data to adjust future projects, right? Like, we can look at this historical data and say, well, on this project, each key got 21 hours done, but on this project, each key got 28 hours done. Is there a correlation between projects? Are porting projects, for example, do they require less of the time of a lead or a key versus an original title? We can go and look at that stuff. The answer, by the way, is we're not sure yet for that one, but hopefully at some point I'll come back and give you the answer. Milestones. Hey, this is a form of data. Are you delivering each milestone? No? Your project's probably not on track. And again, we'd go and ask why. Because there'll be a very good reason as to why milestones aren't being delivered on time. And there's always a good reason. It's not because people are lazy. It's because things get agreed early on, or things ended up being more difficult. That's games development, right? Like, things are more complex than you initially believe. And so we go and ask why. And again, it's a way for us to predict, something's going to go off the rails here if we're not careful. We also want to track how many deliverables for that milestone changed. So, for example, if you have a milestone and you move a load of stuff out of it because you're simply not going to be able to actually finish it, and you don't move anything back in, if we moved 2 or 3 deliverables out from a milestone because we just don't have the time to do it, again, that data point of we move that number of deliverables tells us that maybe something's going wrong here. What is it? And how much time? What were the deliverables? How big were they? Were they massive? In which case, maybe the project's really off course. And again, we pair this with burn downs to a specific milestone to actually see where this issue is stemming from. Maybe it's that the design team and the code team are really understaffed at the moment because a bunch of people have taken a holiday off or gone off sick or something along those lines. And that's why we're not delivering on the milestone. The graph for that, that burn down chart will immediately tell you that long before you get anywhere near to the milestone delivery itself. Ragstar. So hopefully you might know about what these are. These are basically provided by all of the projects across Sumo. And it's basically a way for teams to explain where they're at with their project. And it happens every single week. So personally, we get our teams to fill this in. So it's filled in by a producer and then a key from each of these separate spaces. And we explicitly tell those disciplines, we want you to be honest. And this is why honesty is really important, and why a culture of trust is really important, because we don't want a producer or whoever saying, oh, no, code's fine, no, it's all good, because they're worried that the project is going off track. We want the code team to be able to say, schedule looks really bad, right? We want that so that we can actually see that data and we can then go, okay, and we can go and have that conversation. Why is code in a bad place? What is it that we're going to do? And we'll get an executive summary of this here as well. But we can also use these confidence and stress markers as well. Well, hey, like this is in red, but the confidence is like 6 out of 10, and the stress is like 6 out of 10. Okay, cool. So how does that all work together, right? How does that square get circled? Whereas we look at art, and actually confidence is 8, stress is 4, and there's only 2 things in yellow there. And that seems to make a little bit more sense. So why is it that code is okay with, not as stressed as we would think about being in the red? And you go and talk to them, it's really obvious. It comes out as to why it is, and it's because they've got a plan. Like that was literally the answer in this situation. It was like, yeah, we've got a plan. It's going to be fine next week. Cool, great. We didn't just run it by data and go, oh goodness. We went and talked to the person as well, because that data, really useful, flagged something up. We went and talked to the human, found out what it was all about. We use all of the colors, and we use them realistically. And I suggest that your teams do as well. I would pair this with my milestone acceptance documents and my burn downs to find out if there's consensus on all this stuff. Hey, it looks like the code team's got plenty of time left. According to the burn downs, there's a red here on the schedule. Why is that? Because we've got a plan. Right, okay, I can see where that discrepancy between those 2 pieces of data lies. And hey, you can do this for anything, right? I've given you some examples there of a bunch of different really straightforward ways to actually put this stuff together. But you can do this with absolutely anything. It's not just time that you want to forecast and predict for, especially within production. Steam wish lists. They are probably the biggest single predictor of success of a game on Steam. Probably. That might change over time. And again, the environment changes, so this isn't dogma. That might change over time. But hey, it'd be useful to find out whether or not what we're putting out is, in terms of our videos and our trailers and how we're talking about the game, is that making people excited? Because they'll probably reflect that in a wish list. Newsletter signups. They show that excitement, that engagement. How many people actually want to hear about your products every single month? If it's like 3, oh no. If it's like tens of thousands of people who are like super hardcore, amazing. Player surveys. You can ask your players how they think about what the game is, right? You can also look at Steam reviews as part of this. You can go and look at like how did somebody react to that game adding that feature. You can go and see that on Steam. You can also just do player surveys. If you've got a newsletter, you can get in touch with them and say, hey, what do you think? We added this. Did you like it? Or didn't you like it? You can get data out of that. And then from a product owner perspective, again, which is part of production, you can then say, cool, maybe we need to consider adding this feature or changing this thing about this feature. If you want to do it really fancy, you can do this with A/B split testing if you're making a mobile game, for example. Put out 2 different versions or multiple different versions of a free-to-play game and see how do people go through that initial player onboarding experience. You can do it like that. I strongly recommend that you check out Rebecca Phillips and Lucy Cook's talk, which is about demystifying the marketplace and it's the reason I suggest that is, apart from anything else, it's going to be great, but it's got data in there. It's going to have data in there about the marketplace, and it's all very well and good to hear about, oh, this thing is particularly good, but as soon as you have that data, that helps back that up or refute it. And as I say, that talk is going to be really, really interesting because it's going to have some of that data. And I also recommend John Kennedy's talk, Social Capital When Working Together Remotely. This is probably my most anticipated talk for the sort of the more interaction-y, culture-y track side of things, because John has found a piece of data that and multiple pieces of data that talk about, hey, if you create a good work environment, it's actually really good financially, which is kind of amazing, right? So again, strongly recommend those, that you go and check those things out. So we talked a lot about all of these things, and earlier I said, well, you can never get to 100%, right? You can never get to 100%. And Liechtenstein, the artist, the pop artist, said that the importance of art is in the process of doing it, in the learning experience where the artist interacts with whatever is being made. We are making art. Every discipline that we have when we're making commercial art are artists in some way. And that includes production. And the importance of doing this estimating and this forecasting is not because you want to get to 100%. The importance is in doing the work, all of those things that we just talked about, so that you can understand the project better. You can get a better idea of the future based on different data sets. Not one single data set there actually shows whether or not you are fully on track and everything is right and glorious. But all of them together give you a much better picture of how likely it is that you're going to deliver to time, to quality, to cost, etc. So what lessons did we learn so that you don't have to? Well, look, number one, Gantt chart, it's not a guarantee. We need to get out of this mindset of predictive methodologies giving us guarantees around the future. That isn't to say Gantt charts aren't useful. They are. They're very, very useful in terms of things like knowing dependency chains really early on, right? And knowing what your critical path is early on. And if that's important to you, then a Gantt chart is really useful. But what it's not is a guarantee. And a lot of people, especially people not within production, think that it is, and it's just not. I would also say that AI in project management, I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this. Human thought is the key to production. Human beings make games. Human beings are the ones that figure out whether or not a project is on track or not. Every single thing, all of those tools and techniques that I just mentioned, you couldn't do them without a human being looking at the data and going, is that right? I should investigate. I should talk to another human being about how they're thinking about X, Y, and Z. Project management AI, at the moment, especially, and I want to be very clear, especially the ones that are saying things like, guaranteed to be on track first time, every time, all that good stuff. These are the same charlatans that have been convincing you that prediction is absolutely easy and 100% if you only just did this one thing. And it turns out that one thing is pay them some money for some AI that doesn't work. Now, I will say there are some good AI tools out there that can help producers, but they are never going to be able to help you predict the future. They just won't. Forecasting's not free. Those tools and techniques, you don't have to do all of them. You can do all of them. You can do even more of them. You can do less of them, but they're not free. And they're not free for production, and they're not free for everybody, right? Everybody has to do time tracking for you to be able to understand whether or not you can do an estimate versus an action, right? And to get an estimate, you have to have somebody sit down and go, how long is this going to take? And it's probably not going to be a producer. I would hope it wasn't a producer. It was probably going to be the person from that discipline who's going to have to do that, who's going to have to hand that work out to somebody in their discipline. So you don't have to track everything, and you probably shouldn't, because basically it costs you time and therefore money, and also it's probably not going to be useful. Like, some projects just are not going to need to use some of those tools. Some projects need to use other tools. And be really careful about what you track, because it is going to change how your team thinks. That's why we don't have an overtime tracker, because we do not want to tell our team members, hey, we expect overtime, right? If you have a big tracker sat there that says, overtime tracker, hey, that is something that a new person is going to go, all right, cool, I know what the culture of this place is. Instead, if you want to track that information, find other ways of figuring that stuff out, right? Or other ways of getting to the value of what you're trying to do by tracking over time. Finding out, because really it's about not wasting people's lives and not burning people out. There are other ways that we can do that, or they can come to you personally with that information so that you don't flag that up. But it's the same with everything else, right? If you put if you put numbers into a system, and therefore there is a system, people will try and not in a mean way. They'll try to game the system, right? Like they'll try to go, "Oh, I'm doing a really good thing because I think this is a really good thing." It's just not worth it. And specifically what you want to do is you want to get buy-in from all of your team. You want people to understand why you're doing any of this in the first place, right? And again, it comes back to that Toyota quote, right? The core of it, it's about not wasting people's lives, right? But why are we doing it? Okay, well, here's the data. So you can show people the graphs. And indeed, we do this. We show those burn-down charts that I showed you earlier. We do that for our teams. And we ask, does this fit your worldview? Are we on track? And they go, yeah, or no. And that's really useful because then they can see the reaction that comes out of that. Oh, okay, let's go and have a discussion about that. And then you go and find out why you're off track. And then the producer then works with that person to help solve that situation. And usually it's a process solve. And it's really easy and we'll get back on track and it's great. But if they can, as I say, if people can understand why we're doing this data and that we're doing it not to be punitive, because we don't care about looking over people's shoulders, it's one of the worst things. We don't care about that. What we want to know is, how are you spending your time? Are you spending your time on the right things? If not, why not? Maybe there's probably a really good reason. More lessons. You can tell that we've had a fun time with it. Look, no single data point is going to let you basically say whether or not something is going to work out. Go back to that weather metaphor. There's a 90% chance of rain. There is a 90% chance that this project is actually going to come in on time. And indeed, and this is basically because different projects need different data sets, different kinds of work need different data sets in many ways. Getting stakeholders on board can be really, really difficult. I mean, externals, sometimes, people within upper management or anything along those sorts of lines can be challenging at times to get people on board with this kind of a data set. But it can also happen with the team members as well, especially when things get tough. When you're running into, oh, we've got a real deadline now, the first thing that people tend to do is drop time tracking because it's like, oh, well, I just want to get on and do this. Keep your team members on board and try to get stakeholders on board with this stuff. It took us a really long time to explain the value of this throughout all of Auroch. And I think we're still doing work towards that, but it's really important. Gut instinct. Hey, that is just as valid as anything that we just talked about here. Scary thought, but at the end of the day, hey, I think I've got an amazing idea for an incredible video game, right? Is really just gut instinct. There's no data set that's going to tell you what an incredible video game is going to be. And that's an extreme example, but I feel like we're on track is gut instinct. You should listen to that when your data says that you're not. And you should discuss why that might be happening. Gut instinct is just as important as data. And the culture is really, really essential. If you break trust with any of this stuff, if you use any of this stuff to be punitive, it's death. They will not trust you again. So you have to be open and transparent and use it in the way that you genuinely intend to use it, which is to make things better for everybody. And remember, this data isn't going to give us answers. Basically, it's going to give you information that is going to lead you to better questions, right? It's going to give you some idea of prediction. It's going to give you some idea of how on track you are. But really, this is about asking better questions. So can you get to 100% certainty? Let's ask it again. Can you get to 100% certainty of where you're going to be for a project? No. You absolutely can't, and you still won't be able to, even after the stuff that I just talked about there. But truly, the actual value of doing the forecasting is trying to get to that 100% certainty, knowing that it's a Sisyphean effort and you will never get there. It's about what your teams are going to learn about how it is that they work that is truly the valuable thing. And that will give you more certainty about what is likely to await you in the future. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I will be wearing a different t-shirt. I might have shaved and cut my hair because this is pre-recorded. But if you have any questions, do please get them in. And do please check out your program for other SDC talks from all of the fine folks from Auroch. And if you want a bibliography, this is it. This is your further reading. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of SDC.